So I think now you should be able to see my slides, and I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to give a talk at the PQC Asia Forum. I'm excited to have this opportunity, and I'll just go ahead, and if there's any questions, have someone speak back to me, or I think you can ask questions via that system that's set up in place as well. So with that, I will go ahead and start then. So I'm going to talk about the long road to standardization that we've started on at NIST together with the rest of the PQC community. And I'll start off with just a timeline of some of the events that have been going on for the past few years. I'm focusing more on the events that have been relevant to us here at NIST. Other organizations and groups have other important milestones as well. But for us, our project began in around 2012 when we...
I'm sorry, I think the slideshow is not working properly, so could you please start the slideshow?
Do you see
sorry, it's working now. Thank you.
Okay, all right. So yeah, back in 2012, we began our project. We got several good members of our team together, and we started studying post-quantum cryptography and how it would affect us at NIST with the standards that we do. And last year in 2015, we held a workshop, and we had around 150 people from government, academia, and industry come together. And it was very, very successful. Then, of course, the NSA released their statement on post-quantum cryptography, and not too long after, we at NIST issued a report on post-quantum cryptography, where we shared our understanding of the threat of quantum computers and outlined our initial approach. And that same month, I gave a talk at PQ Crypto in Japan and outlined our preliminary plan for standardization, that we would be holding kind of like a competition-like process to find post-quantum cryptographic algorithms that we could standardize at NIST. So then in August, just a few months ago, we published our draft submission requirements and evaluation criteria, and we asked for public feedback and comment, and that comment period ended in September. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about today, what have we learned as we've gone these first few years along this road to standardization, and what are some of the challenges that we still see that we will come across. And I'll review the call for proposals that we have, and also the comments that we received back. So just to kind of give an overview of what was in our draft call for proposals, it started out giving the basic requirements for submission packages. We wanted everyone to have a cover sheet. There were certain documents we wanted attached. We were asking for 2 implementations, both a reference implementation and an optimized implementation, as well as signed intellectual property statements. We also outlined the minimal acceptability requirements, that we would want every submission to meet these requirements at a minimum. And the scope of these, so we were looking for 3 functionalities. We were going to be asking for public key signatures, public key encryption, and key exchange algorithms. And we gave the basic requirements for each of those functions. And then after that, we gave the evaluation criteria that we would be using to evaluate the submissions. We both will evaluate the submissions internally at NIST, and we hope the larger cryptographic community as well will also evaluate the submissions. But the criteria that we will focus on, number 1 is security. We will look to see if the submissions meet the security models that we were asking for, as well as the target security strengths that we defined. We would also look at the performance. How large are the key sizes? what is the computational efficiency, meaning how fast can we encrypt or decrypt? And we would also consider the flexibility of an algorithm. Can it do other features besides signatures encryption or key exchange, or can it be implemented on a wide variety of systems, things like that. And then we ended the draft call with a little bit more detail on the plans for the evaluation process, how long it would take, how it would work, and so forth. So what we have noticed for sure is that this standardization effort for post-quantum cryptography is very, very complex. It's much more complex than anything we've done at NIST before in terms of cryptographic standards. We've tried to model it somewhat after our AES competition that we had, as well as our SHA-3 competition that ended not too long ago. Each of those was only one cryptographic primitive, whereas what we're looking at right now, we'll be doing 3 primitives all at the same time. So there is a much broader scope, and that will certainly be difficult. It's also more challenging because we are concerned with not just classical attacks, but obviously quantum attacks as well. And that's something we have not had to address before with our cryptographic standards. With all of this as well, there's both a theoretical and a practical aspect to consider when we look at security, especially for these post-quantum algorithms. Many times there's a theoretical security guarantee, but what happens in practice doesn't necessarily always match the theory. For some crypto systems, there's a bit of a gap, and so that's something we have to look at. It quickly became apparent to us that there was no one PQC algorithm that would obviously fit all the requirements and would just be an easy drop-in replacement for RSA or for ECDSA or Diffie-Hellman. So as a result, we're going to have to weigh many trade-off factors. We're going to have to decide, is it security that's most important, or the key size, or the signature size, or how fast you can encrypt or decrypt? And right now, it seems each particular post-quantum crypto system that people are considering, they all have their advantages and they all have some sort of disadvantages. So it makes it difficult to compare. Some more complexities that we're looking at are, we know that these algorithms are going to need to be put into new and existing applications, and these migrations might not be very easy. We very well might have to change some of the internet protocols we use to handle these new post-quantum crypto systems. For example, if the public key size is extremely large, then that wouldn't fit into some of the protocols because they have upper bounds on the key size. And so just to summarize, there are many aspects in dealing with this that we've already come across that we haven't had to handle in previous standards that makes this just a lot harder to work through. And then, and all this, we kind of call this a competition-like process. What we're embarking upon is, it shares many similarities with some of the competitions we have done in the past, but there are also some important differences as well. There will not be just one winner like there was with SHA-3, where KCHAC was the winner. We are looking for 3 different functionalities, and so there will be more than one algorithm for standardization selected. And for each functionality as well, we anticipate that there very well could be more than one algorithm selected for standardization. So there will be multiple winners. And we understand that many of these algorithms might not be agreed upon by everyone, but what we're hoping for is that the algorithms that come out of this process will be good choices that meet everybody's minimum requirements, even if people don't have a consensus that these are necessarily the perfect algorithms to use. And we also want to emphasize that we are looking to standardize algorithms as soon as we feel that we we can do so in a safe and secure fashion. But that doesn't mean if an algorithm is not selected for standardization through this process, that it cannot be standardized in the future. And that's a little different than in the past competitions, where once we selected an algorithm like SHA-3, that meant all the other hash functions that had been submitted would not be standards. It could be that an algorithm that is not initially selected, after further study, turns out to be an algorithm that we do study. And then finally, with a competition, we feel like once we begin the competition, we set the rules and the evaluation criteria, and then those rules and criteria will not change throughout the competition. With this post-quantum cryptography process, we want to make it clear that it's possible that the requirements could change depending on developments in the field. Post-quantum cryptography is still, there's a lot of very active research, and if some new research is discovered that means we need to change some of our requirements, we want to be able to do that. Okay, so just to get a little bit more detailed in terms of what the draft call for proposal was asking for, as I mentioned, we were looking for signatures. At NIST, we have 3 documents that standardize public key cryptography. And the first of them was FIPS 186-4, known as the Digital Signature Standard, which had public key signature schemes such as RSA and ECDSA. And so because those would be vulnerable to a quantum computer, we would want to replace those with post-quantum signature schemes. So that is the first functionality that we're asking for. The other 2 standards documents that we have at NIST that would need to be replaced are SP 856A and SP 856B that handle key establishment using either encryption or key exchange algorithms. So 56B handles encryption where you use key transport, mainly that's using RSA, where you exchange encrypted secret values between 2 parties, and then you establish your shared secret that way. And 56A dealt more with schemes like Diffie-Hellman. So because those are the standards that we need to replace here at NIST, the public key cryptographic standards that we have, those are the 3 functionalities that we are focused on replacing initially. So for each of those functionalities, all right, I see there's a question submitted, but it looks like it's for the end of the talk, so I'll hold off on that. But so for each of those functionalities that I just mentioned we are looking for, we gave security models that we were wanting submissions to be able to meet. So for signatures, we wanted schemes to be existentially unforgeable with respect to adaptive chosen message attack. That's often abbreviated EUF-CMA. And for encryption, we wanted semantically secure with respect to adaptive chosen ciphertext attack, or IND-CCA2. And these definitions were meant to specify security against attacks which use classical queries. We're not talking about quantum queries when we give these security models. For key exchange algorithms, in our draft call for proposals, we didn't give a security model because when we looked in the literature, it didn't seem there was one good security model that would be the right fit for what we were looking for. So we did not provide one, and we just asked the submitters to submit any security model that they thought was relevant. So, and also, besides a security model, we also defined some target security strengths that we hoped that the submitters would be able to tell us as a preliminary estimate where they felt that their submissions landed on these levels right here. So we were putting forth 5 different security strengths where we gave the classical security and the quantum security in bits. And then as examples, we tried to kind of emphasize what we meant. So for example, for security level 1, we said 128 bits of classical security and 64 bits of quantum security. And that would be roughly the same amount of resources as it would take to do a brute force key search on AES 128. And similarly, levels 3 and 5 are defined in the same way. Algorithm 2, or level 2, 128 bits of classical security and 80 bits of quantum security, that would require roughly the same amount of resources as doing a collision search on SHA-256 or SHA-3 256. Now we put forth these target security strengths, and it was not an easy, we had a lot of internal discussion on the best way to do this, because we know that as of yet, there is still no clear consensus on the best way to measure quantum attacks and quantum security. However, for standardization, we also need to have concrete parameters and have some idea of the security estimate that those parameters give. So we were asking submitters to tell us which level they felt they were at, and that would enable us to compare different submissions together. If two submissions both claim to be level 1 security, then that means we could hopefully compare them together and try and evaluate which one would be better. So we also talked about various other security properties in our draft call. We talked about wanting to come up with submissions which would be as close to drop-in replacements as we could. And so we need to consider things like, what are the key sizes, the signature size, how fast is the key generation time. We also wanted submitters to give us the auxiliary functions that would be needed to implement these in real world situations. So what hash functions that they would recommend using with their particular crypto system, what key derivation functions and random number generators and so forth. We also wanted submitters to talk about any special features that have relevance to security or performance issues, because for some of the post-quantum crypto systems that are being proposed, we are aware that some of them are unique and do have some properties that need to be looked at. For example, there's some schemes where if you reuse the public key, that can be a security vulnerability. And that's important because there are some situations where you want to have static protocols. For example, a public key cache in TLS. So if you were to use a post-quantum crypto system where public key reuse was a security vulnerability, you would not be able to use it in that situation. There are also other proposed crypto systems which have decryption failures, where occasionally the algorithms, instead of decrypting correctly, they fail, and that can lead to problems in some protocols as well. So we would want the submitters to address that. Of course, we also would like properties such as perfect forward secrecy, resistance to side channel attacks. We want these to be compatible with existing protocols and networks as much as possible, as well as be as simple and flexible as they can. Now, people have asked us for some of our advice in terms of transition and migration to post-quantum cryptographic algorithms. Right now, we obviously don't have any standards for post-quantum schemes. So all we can say at this point is we will update our guidance when the PQC standards are available. But what that means in the meantime is right now, classical security strength levels of 128, 192, and 256 bits are still recommended and acceptable through the year 2030. And we do want to still encourage people to move away from any schemes that only have classical security strength of 112 bits, because we don't feel that is secure enough at this point right now. So even though businesses or companies might be aware that they'll need to transition to new PQC algorithms at some point in the future, we want them to, if they're currently using schemes with 112 bits, we want them to migrate off, even though they know that there will still be another migration coming on in the not too distant future. And with all this, we will continue to update our advice as soon as we have any changes. Now, there have been a lot of suggestions and people considering different approaches to how to handle the transition and the migration to new post-quantum algorithms. One of the ideas that's been mentioned a lot is using hybrid modes. And by that we mean a scheme that combines a classical crypto system with a post-quantum crypto system in such a way that the scheme is secure as each of those, as both the classical and the post-quantum part, meaning you would have to break both schemes to break the hybrid mode. And people have asked, can such a mode be validated under FIPS 140? And the answer is yes. If it's done correctly, then such a mode could be validated under FIPS 140 validation. However, we want to emphasize that FIPS 140 validation would only validate the classical component, the algorithms that have already been approved by our standards, and it would say nothing about the PQC component at this point, because we have no PQC standards at this point. We do feel that hybrid modes might be useful, but that they would only be an interim stage in the transition, and ultimately we believe that we would be best served by using post-quantum crypto schemes instead of a hybrid mode after we've gained enough confidence in their use. Another topic that's been raised in terms of what might be done sooner than later is stateful hash-based signature schemes. And that especially is looking like a very promising possibility, because people have a very good understanding of their security properties with respect to quantum attacks. Right now, most of you might be aware that the IETF is taking action in specifying stateful hash-based signatures. There are some RFCs that have been put forward and are being moved along the process. We have coordinated with the IETF, and we will continue to do so, and any other standards organizations. We think that stateful hash-based signature schemes could very well be standardized before this whole process that we're starting on, which might take several years. We think stateful hash-based signature schemes could be standardized in as little as a year or two, because their security is well understood. But with that, we would note that they would only be standardized for specific applications like code signing. And with respect to our draft call for proposal that we put out, we want to make it clear as well that hybrid modes are out of scope for what we're asking for. We are looking for the post-quantum primitive, not the hybrid mode. And we would also say that stateful hash-based signature schemes are also out of scope for our draft call for proposals. The stateful hash-based signature schemes do not meet the API that we are asking for. So they will be stateful hash-based signature schemes will be evaluated on a separate process rather than this competition-like process that we're talking about here. Okay, so having summarized a little bit about what is in the draft call for proposals, I'll talk about now the comments that we received from people during the comment period. We had 26 different people or groups or organizations submit comments back to us. Some of them were very short, some of them were quite long, several pages, and they were from all around the world, and we're grateful for the feedback that we did receive. The vast majority of them were asking for just simple clarifications in the text of the call for proposals, where they weren't sure what we meant, or they suggested text to improve the writing of what we meant that would make it more clear to everybody else. So they would ask us to define terms such as perfect forward secrecy, or be more consistent in the terminology we were using, things like that. mostly editorial and grammatical that were easy to deal with. There was also some comments, minor ones, that were suggesting that we require constant time implementations, or that we would require more implementation platforms. We received some comments dealing with the intellectual property requirements that we specified. Some asking for decryption failure thresholds. The two most major areas where we received a lot of feedback had to deal with public key encryption and key exchange, kind of the approach that we were taking, and people had some comments about that. And I'll give more details here in just a minute. The other major area where we received comments had to deal with our approach to quantum security and the target security levels, the 5 levels that we put forward. And finally, there were also some suggestions on the API that we put out. So I'll get a little bit more information here on the comments now and how we responded to them. So the first minor set of comments, for example, a couple people suggested that we should require constant time implementations to provide side channel resistance. We decided to encourage constant time implementations, but that we wouldn't require every submitter to do that. We hope that they all do that, but we would not require it. Similarly, we only had one NIST reference platform that we mentioned in the draft call for proposals, and there was people that said, well, these need to be evaluated on a larger number of platforms, and we certainly agree with that. So we encourage submitters to implement them on as a wide variety as they can, require that every submission had to be evaluated on a large number of platforms. We felt that would be a lot of work. We certainly hope that that work is done in the evaluation and analysis phase, but we did not want to require it with a submission. So we are encouraging that, but again, not requiring that. Then the next topic was intellectual property requirements. Here it was a little bit different. If people remember, for SHA-3, in that competition that we ran, the intellectual property requirements that we asked for was that all submissions basically be royalty-free, available worldwide without any IP restrictions. And we wanted to follow the same approach for this process here. But in talking with our legal team here at NIST, they modified that slightly. And they said we couldn't exclude algorithms that had some royalties, but that we could make it very clear that we preferred algorithms that didn't have any intellectual property restrictions. So even though we received some comments suggesting that we put the intellectual property requirements back to what they were during the SHA-3 competition, after consultation with our legal team again, we basically left the IP requirements the same as what they were in the draft call for proposals. So we are not completely requiring royalty-free algorithms. However, we are making it strongly clear that we prefer royalty-free algorithms because they lead to more widespread adoption, and we believe that is in everybody's best interest. And we expect that for each functionality, for signatures, for public key encryption, and for key establishment, that we will have a royalty-free option by the time we're done. The next minor topic that a few comments came in was asking for us to give a threshold for decryption failure. And we decided not to give a hard bound, but we would leave that decision to the submitters as to what level of decryption failure would lead to violating the security models that we asked for. So that is left to the submitter rather than requiring a hard bound at this time from us. Okay, turning to the first of the areas where we received more, several more comments and where we made more substantial changes as a result. There was comments that was that was talking about our approach to key establishment was either too vague or it was too narrowly defined. So we talked about that again amongst ourselves. We had lots of discussions and internal meetings. And as a result, we will continue to ask for public key encryption, just as we did in our draft call. However, in place of asking for key exchange algorithms, what we are asking for now will be key encapsulation mechanisms, or what are known as chems. And any key exchange algorithm can be put in the framework of a chem, so we're not really asking for anything really different. We're just asking for a different framework in which to consider it, which some of the suggestions in the comments we received pointed out some of the advantages of doing it this way. So if you're not familiar with a chem, chems have three algorithms. They have a key generation algorithm, which generates both a public and a private key pair. They have an encapsulation algorithm, which uses the public key to generate a ciphertext and a shared secret. And then there's a decapsulation algorithm. The other end of the key establishment, the other party, he uses the private key and the encapsulation ciphertext to recover the shared secret. So in the new call for proposals that we'll have out shortly, instead of key exchange, we will be asking for chems as we're defining them here. And we give more details in the call. So in general, chems and public key encryption, you can generally convert them back and forth between each other in some fairly standard ways, but we will leave it to the submitters whether they want to submit their crypto systems as either an encryption scheme or as a chem scheme. For both, we will still require IND CCA2 security, meaning semantically secure with respect to adaptive chosen ciphertext attack. We also received some comments that caused us to consider adding another option. Some people pointed out that purely ephemeral key exchange protocols can be done in a way such that only passive security is required. So we will consider encryption or chem schemes which provide semantic security with respect to chosen plaintext attack or IND CPA security, because there are some applications where this makes sense, where you do a purely ephemeral key exchange and you don't need IND CCA2 security. So that is now another option that can be submitted to us as a chem or as an encryption scheme. Early on, we put this on the PQC forum. It's a mailing list that we have, and we mentioned these changes that we would be asking for chems. And one of the first comments we received back said, "Oh no, you're not asking for Diffie-Hellman types anymore." And we want to clarify that is not the case. We believe that any Diffie-Hellman type scheme can easily be submitted as a chem. So we are still looking for Diffie-Hellman type schemes. We just want them formatted as a chem. We received one question where someone was asking about if we were asking for authenticated key exchange, and we want to make it clear that that's out of scope. We consider it a protocol and not a primitive, and we want to be focusing on the primitives and not protocols for this process. So on this slide, I just put up what the chem API looks like. I don't feel I need to discuss this too much, but if you're looking to submit a crypto system to us, then this is what the API looks like for a chem. We've also put this up on the PQC forum so you can see it there. It's very similar to the API that's been done for other post-quantum key exchange algorithms from some other people as well, like the Open Quantum Safe project. Okay, turning to the other major area, we had a lot of, it was a challenge when we wrote our draft call for proposals to write down our approach to quantum security and the target security levels that we were looking for. And so it wasn't really a surprise to us that we received a lot of comments on this area of our document. There was people that were confused a little bit on our approach on how we were asking, or we were looking to define quantum security strength in terms of the cost of breaking various symmetric crypto primitives, since we're working with public key cryptographic algorithms. And so there was people that questioned our overall approach to that method. There was also various questions or suggestions on whether people needed to submit parameters for all 5 levels, or suggestions on some of the numbers for the different levels that should be changed. They might have said, for example, that 64 bits of quantum security is too low, or that it's too high, things of that nature. There was some concerns that we asked for classical security and quantum security measured in bits, and that for many post-quantum crypto systems, you can't tune those 2 parameters separately. They're tied together, so it would be hard necessarily for some of them to be a natural fit for some of the target security levels. And we also got some suggestions that we should not use target security levels and just let the submitters describe their security to us in a broad range. We still feel that we do want to have target security levels. I think now we're calling them security strength categories, but we're going to define them in a slightly different way than we did in our draft call for proposals. Instead of using a single number of bits of security, instead we're going to define the security strength as I've put down here in the table at the bottom. For example, level 1, we mean an algorithm is in this security strength category if the resources required to break it would be roughly equivalent to the resources required to break AES 128 using an exhaustive key search. And so on for the other levels. We feel that we still want to have these security strength categories because they will allow us to compare the submissions to each other more directly, as well as also allow us to make decisions on when we need to transition to longer keys, which is something that we're always concerned with in NIST. So we understand that this approach is not necessarily the best approach, or it has universal consensus, but this is what makes sense to us, and we're still open to hearing feedback on our approach to quantum security in this fashion. So we're aware that this is a kind of a difficult way to have to analyze a submission. You need to analyze what are the resources required to break your scheme, and how does that compare to breaking some of these symmetric key primitives that we already have. And we want people to measure their computational resources using a variety of metrics. I don't want to get into all the different ways to do that. I've listed a few of them here, and in our call we will also discuss some of those. And we want to emphasize that submitters don't need to submit parameters for all 5 security categories. They should just submit them wherever they feel that best suits their algorithm or their submission. And we understand that these are preliminary security estimates. This is just something that we hope will get the ball rolling, where people can tell us what security level they're at, and we can begin to compare different algorithms that are in the same security level. We won't kick a scheme out because they set their parameters off by just a little bit. So to help make this a little bit more clear, we've given a hypothetical scenario that might make this easier to understand. So assume you have a PQC algorithm that you're going to submit, and there's only one tunable parameter, and that corresponds to classical security. And assume that there's no known quantum attacks besides generic ones, such as Grover-based attacks. Then what this would mean would be to meet security strengths 1, 3, and 5, you would simply set your classical security to 128, 192, and 256 bits respectively. If you were to be in security strength 2, it would mean that you would be somewhere between 128 bits of classical security and 192 bits of classical security. And where exactly you would be on that range depends on how well the attacks Groverize and so forth. So we've talked a little bit about that on the PQC forum to help people understand kind of what we're talking about. And there are still some very active discussion on the PQC forum about this security section. There's been some suggestions that levels 4 and 5 are maybe a little bit overkill in terms of classical security. So there is still a chance that we modify that a little bit. But currently, this is the thinking that we have right now. We will still be requiring a classical security analysis with all the submissions. Classical computers are not going away, and in practice, it very well may be that the best attacks on any of these post-quantum crypto systems are classical attacks. So we want submitters to include that for a variety of reasons, several of which I've listed here. But I'm getting shorter on time, so I don't want to go through all of them completely. All right, so now if we turn our attention to what lies ahead, the final submission requirements and evaluation criteria will be published soon. We believe it will be in the next week or two or 3 that they'll be published on our website, and that will start the post-quantum process officially, where people can begin to submit algorithms to us, and there will be about a 1-year time period where people can submit, with the deadline being November 30th of 2017. So in the document, it will list the detailed submission requirements, where we were asking for a complete specification, analysis, a secure analysis, and we'll need signed intellectual property statements and disclosures as well. Just as before, we have minimal acceptability requirements. That part hasn't really changed. We want all algorithms to be publicly disclosed and available for public review during the process so that everyone can implement them and experiment with them and evaluate them. Obviously, we don't want any components which are insecure against quantum computers. And again, we're looking for public key encryption, chems, and digital signatures. I've listed the website there. That's where everything is posted at. All the documents will be posted. Right now, it has the draft call and submission requirements, but when the final one is made, we'll put an announcement on the PQC forum, and we will post them at this webpage. We promise not to change the submission requirements. However, as I said, we reserve the right to change the evaluation criteria depending on developments in the field. So the evaluation criteria, also the same as before. I won't go through them again, but they are security, cost, and the particular algorithm characteristics. So just a short note on how long this will all take. Once the year for submission ends, we will very soon after post the complete and proper submissions, and we will hold a workshop in April of 2018 that will be co-located jointly with PQ Crypto, where we will invite the submitters of algorithms to present their submissions. And that will lead to an initial phase of evaluation, which we estimate will be 12 to 18 months. We will review internally. We hope the cryptographic community will review externally as well. During this initial phase, there will be no modifications. At the end of this phase, we will narrow down the algorithms to a smaller set, and we'll undergo a second round of evaluations. We'll have another workshop. There will be minor changes allowed. And at the end of that, we may be ready for standardization, or we may need a third round to narrow down the candidates further. All of this depends on the number of submissions and the quality of the submissions. So this is just the tentative plan that we have at this point. We anticipate this evaluation process will last from 3 to 5 years, at which point we will have algorithms selected and we will begin to write the documents that will become NIST standards. And of course, we promise to do this in an open and a transparent way, and we will issue reports throughout the process describing our rationale for the choices and selections we make. So just in summary then, this is going to be a long journey. We've only just begun going down the first part of the path towards standardization. And we already have many complexities and challenges and know that there will be many in the road to come. We're grateful for all the feedback and the comments which we received. It's greatly improved the call for proposals that we'll put forth. And we want to continue to work with all of you to come up with the best algorithms possible. You can send any comments to us at this email address. There's our webpage. And if you haven't yet signed up for the PQC forum, you can go onto our webpage and it describes how to do that. We have announcements there as well as discussion on this process as well. So that's the end of my slides, and I think I'm mostly out of time. There was one question that said, what is the timeline? I think I put that on the last slide. And it also asks, when do we expect that a quantum computer might be a real threat? We don't believe that we at NIST are the most expert in knowing when a quantum computer will be built. So we also are consulting with the other experts in the field, and that's all public information. We've seen reports and estimates that it could be in as short as 10 to 15 years, but we don't know if it will be sooner or not. So it's hard for us to say too much. We are not actively ourselves working on building a quantum computer. We are just monitoring the process of others. So that's as much as we know. So I think that's mostly of the answer. If there's any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them, although I think I'm mostly out of time as well.
So there are 2 more questions from the audiences. So if you have some, you can. So one is about the quantum random oracle model. So even though the quantum query is generally not the primary concern of NIST, but what about the quantum random oracle queries?
Okay. Oh yes, I see that question now. Submitters are free to discuss that and include that in any submission package. We haven't mentioned that at all in our draft call for proposals. We aren't requiring that. So we're leaving that up to the submitter if they want to do that or not.
Okay, thank you.
There was one other question. It's about the new approach to quantum security. Can you elaborate on it? It would probably be hard to elaborate a lot on our new approach to quantum security. I would say if you look at the posts we have in the PQC forum, we've now had several posts where people have asked us questions and we've responded. And that would probably be the best place to look at for more elaboration at that point.
Okay, thank you very much for your insightful and useful talk. Please, okay, there is one more question.
Sorry, Dustin, I just have one quick question. I like very much the last comment you made. You said the process in the end will be a transparent process. What does it mean? I mean, how do you make the final decision? Is the committee making votes? I mean, how transparent this process will be? How do we, I mean, as outside, how do we know how much information we will know in the end?
That's a good question, Jintai. Internally, we have a team that's on this project. We will meet together. I don't know if we decided if it will be a vote or not, but the way it will be transparent is that we will write a report that completely explains our rationale. I think for the SHA-3 process, for example, people felt it was pretty open and transparent, that we weren't hiding anything, and we documented the reasons for our selection, and people weren't too surprised by the selection. So we will explain all our decisions and choices in reports as we go along and at the workshops that we hold.
Yeah, as you explained, this process probably is much more complicated, much more, I don't know how to describe, much more difficult than the other process, right? I mean, so one way you said about the transparency, you mean there will be no surprise. That's what you meant. Is how I understand it?
Well, hopefully by the end of this process, as we're evaluating, there might not be consensus on algorithms, but hopefully that the more evaluation and analysis that we do, people will have more confidence in the narrowed pool of algorithms that we have. And so it shouldn't be a complete surprise what algorithm gets selected, because there's been so much analysis on it.
Okay, just last quick question. So you were also talking about this is not a competition, right? Which means in the end, you now rank them, or you just say those guys we will recommend, or you will rank them in the end. Like this is number one choice, number two choice.
It's not necessarily completely that way. It might be, we feel at the end that these are algorithms that we could standardize right now, and it could be that other algorithms we say we think they need a little bit more analysis before we standardize. We're trying to do this process so that we can have standards ready as soon as possible, in the event that quantum computers are available soon. So we're wanting to try and quickly get some algorithms that will work. We're not guaranteeing that they are necessarily the best algorithms that could be chosen. So just because we don't initially select an algorithm doesn't mean that it can't be standardized later.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Let me make sure. The CAM algorithm requires only CPA, right? Only in the CPA, right? Rather than in the CCA.
You can submit both to us, CPA and CCA. We will accept both.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Please give him a big applause for his talk.